Today we're going to go over a couple programs that we're going to write together, and then on Wednesday we're going to go over Chapter 4. You can see I've got it up on the screen here. So the programs that we're going to go over today, we'll talk about the if-else statement. There's also a switch statement, and I'll show you an example of that also a little bit later, but not right now. All right. So you can see it talks about decision making. So it's if-else. These are all different variations of if-else. We'll talk more about input validation, although we've been working on that already. You'll be introduced to radio buttons and checkboxes, the switch statement, and list boxes. And as I've kind of done before, what I'll do on Wednesday is I'll just kind of make up a demo program as we go on. All right, that will show all this stuff for you. All right. So what I'd like you all to do, please, is to hopefully you've already completed, or you at least have started, the BMI program for this class. All right. Now, if you haven't, this is going to be a lot harder. All right. But since it's an assignment and we did it as a class, we did this one as a class. You should have it either done or at least somewhat done. So I'm going to do the same thing. In other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go where I've got all of my programs saved. And for Chapter 3, there was the BMI one. All right, I'm going to copy it to my desktop, and that's what I'd like you to do also. All right. Hopefully you're aware of this, because hopefully I told you this already. But one way that we can open up this BMI program is to double-click on the folder, and then you'll notice that what happens when you open up that folder is you get this, or something that looks like this. Again, yours might be different if you'd called it something else. All right. Now, this has got all the information that you see, or basically most of the information that you see on the screen once you start to run the project. But what I'm concerned with is if you double-click this one that says Visual Studio Solution, that's another way that you can start up the program. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to double-click on it just to start it up. That'll start up Visual Studio, and it'll start up the project inside of Visual Studio. So I'd like you to please do the same thing. In other words, I want that to be up and running. Now again, the one that we did as a class looked like this. Hopefully you remember it. All right. This is the coloring, etc. that I used. Yours might be different, and it's really and truly not a big thing one way or the other. But right now, if I were to run this program in its current format, and I put in for a height 77 and I put in for a weight 177, it gives me the BMI, and that's correct. That's what we want it to do. All right. But what we're going to add in this particular example is we're going to add another label here and another text box right here. That label will say something like status, and then the text box will say either underweight, optimal weight, or overweight, based on what number we figure out in here. All right? So that's the plan right now. And as we go through this, again, I'll show you what I did, I'll walk through it, and as we talked about before, if you have questions, it's going to be then your responsibility to ask. All right? So this is what we had done last time. This is what I did and had you do as a class. This was the comment for the BMI stuff. All right? And we had come through here and we had coded up our exit button. I gave you all that code. We coded up the clear button, and remember what the clear button is doing right there is it's clearing out this, it's clearing out this, it's clearing out this, and then it's going and putting the cursor right there. All right, so we had done that. And then finally we had come in here and we had put this into try-catch block, and there really isn't going to be much code for us to add, to be honest with you. All right, because we know now that when we get to this, we've run everything. So what we're going to have to change is once we figure out our BMI right here, we're going to have to, based on that BMI, we're going to have to say, well, the person's underweight, overweight, or of optimal weight. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. So I'm going to come back here, and as I've done in the past, I always lock this. but I want to unlock part of it so I can add a couple more controls right now. So that's the first thing I want to do. So I want to move my buttons down. And you'll notice right now they're locked, so I'm going to go over to my properties window, and I'm going to unlock them by just double-clicking where it says true. All right, and now they're unlocked. So I'm going to move them down, and then I can do this any way I want, but I'm going to just copy these and put them down there. Now, I'm asking you this because I want to make sure, is there anything that I just did right there that didn't make sense? Again, I unlocked the buttons so I could move them down because I wanted to add this. And we're going to change that heading. We're going to change the names in a second. All right. And then once I've done that, I've got it looking fairly decent. I mean, it's not great or anything, but it's not bad. All right. Then I'll go back and I'll relock all the stuff that I just added. So now I've got height, weight, BMI. Well, that's kind of silly because I don't want that to be BMI. And if you look over here, when I copied it, it didn't call it BMI either. All right? It called it label 1. So I want to change that to label status. And I want the wordage or verbiage in there. In other words, I want to go down to my text, and I want to also change that to status. All right, so I've changed this to LBL status for the name and status with a colon at the end for the text. And then over here, I'm going to click on my text box, and it's called text box 1, which is a silly name. So I'm going to change that to text box status. All right. Now, a couple things that you may or may not think about. Really, right now, I've got everything I want to do here is done. All right. But the next thing I want to do is, well, if you look, it says Program 3.6, which isn't correct anymore. This is a program from Chapter 4, and in fact, it is Program 8. All right. So I want to change what I've got up here because it's wrong. So my text for my form, I want to change that from what it currently says, Program 3.6, Body Mass Index 1. I want it to say Program 4-8, Body Mass Index 2. So I've just changed this. All right. So far what I've done is I went in and I unlocked my buttons so I could move them down. Then I copied both my BMI label and my BMI text box and put them right below where the current ones are, and changed the names to LBL status and LBL and text box status. Any questions on any of that stuff? All right, maybe it seems like I'm going through this quickly, but this is all stuff that actually should make sense to people now. Now, you know, sometimes people say, yeah, well, you've been doing it for a long time. You should, yeah, I get that, but I'm not doing it quickly. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to go down to View, and I want to look at my tab order to see if it's a little goofy. Because notice, since these were 9 and 10, all right, and I'm looking at the tab order, and some of it at least doesn't make a lot of sense to me right now. And let me explain to you what I mean. That's 0, that sounds good. That's 1, that sounds good. But the next ones that are 2, and then 3 that goes there, I can't literally, this doesn't make a lot of sense for that right there to be number 2, which is what it was. Because really, what I can't do in here is I can't tab to this and I can't tab to that anyway. All right, I can't change them. I guess I can tab to them, but I can't change them. The BMI is set based on the height and weight that I enter. The status is set based on the BMI. So in other words, I want this to still be 0. So I want that to be 0, and I want that to be 1, but I want that to be 2, that to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now, whether you do that or don't do that really and truly isn't that important. But what I'm trying to do by setting the tab order, remember we went to View, we went down to tab order to bring this up. But remember, the reason for doing this is ideally what you want to do is you want to take and make the app as simple for somebody to run as possible. Since the height text box right here is set to 0, that should be highlighted when the program begins. So I should be able to put in a height, and if I hit the tab key, I should go to here. If I hit tab again, I'd go to here. If I tab again, I'd go to here. If I tab again, I can go to here. If I tab again, I would go here, but I can't manually change this because it's read-only. And if I tab to here, same thing. Again, even though I've got tab orders set, you can't tab to a label. So that doesn't matter. All right, so now that I've set all this, I'm going to go back to View, and I'm going to click on Tab Order again. All right. And I like to always do this, just highlight everything and make sure everything's locked. That looks good. And the BMI should be a read-only, so I'm making sure that the read-only for that is set to true, and you can see that it is. And the read-only for that one should be set to true, and it is. Does it make sense to people that the reason that I copied this one was because I wanted the one below it to be basically the same thing? All right, I could have copied either one of these, but then I would have had to have gone back and reset the read-only and reset the color. I'm too lazy to do that. So I didn't want to do that. All right. Now, if I save this and run the program, nothing has changed except the visual look of the program. In other words, I can come through here and I can type in 77 and 177, and I can calculate, and I still get my BMI. What I want to change is this, and when I look at this, this might be a little bit small for saying underweight, overweight, or optimal weight, but I'll deal with that later. I can always make that a little bit bigger, all right? But that's where that status is going to go. Again, the calculate appeared to work, the clear appears to work, and the exit's going to work. But before I go in and write the extra code for the calculate routine, does it make sense to everybody? Please look up on the screen. That right now, when I put numbers in here, or put something in here, all right, and I clear, it's clearing this, and it's clearing this. Does that make sense? So I'm going to want to add this and make sure that that clears too. All right. And it's interesting. I was doing some reading over the weekend on Android and especially iPhone apps, and why a lot of times with an Android and an iPhone app, one of the main reasons that they're rejected in the App Store. Okay? And one of the reasons is, and don't worry if you don't understand this, but with some of the controls like this that you put into your app, it automatically puts garbage text in there. And sometimes what people do is they don't remove that garbage text because they don't need to, so they leave it there. And that's one of the things that Apple looks at. If you leave the garbage text in there, they just reject your app immediately, because their idea basically is you don't care. Well, in much the same way, I could sit there and not add to my clear routine, and I can click calculate, and that'll clear, and that'll clear, and that'll clear, and then that'll be, the cursor will be put right there. But the problem is, I'll still have a value in there, and that looks bad. All right. So the first thing that I want to do here is I want to come into my clear routine, and I want to make sure that I also clear out that other text box. And that was the one that I called text box status. And I want to set that, again, double quote, double quote. All right. So now I've done what I wanted to do right there. Okay. I added this line. The order in which you add these 4 lines right here, the order in which you add those really doesn't matter. In fact, you probably could even reverse the order and it wouldn't matter. I just believe it makes sense. Height, weight, BMI status. I did it in the same order, height, weight, BMI status. I did it in that order. To me, it's much more straightforward to do it in a straightforward way. All right? And this is not a hard app. I'm the only one writing it. I'm the only one who's going to be maintaining it. But if you're actually working and you're actually a programmer, one of the advantages you get out of using names that make sense and writing things in a common sense way is that if somebody eventually ends up maintaining your code, they won't have to be constantly asking you, hey, Eric, why'd you do this? Hey, Micah, why'd you name it this? If you just give it a decent name and you do things in a common sense way, they'll be able to understand it. And take my word for it as somebody who's been a programmer. You don't want people who are maintaining your code constantly sending you emails and appearing at your doorstep asking you, can you help me with this? No, I've moved on. If you write it well enough, that shouldn't be an issue. All right. So the only thing we have to add here that's new now, since we just added that into our clear routine, since we just added that line, is to come up and calculate. All right. Now, I'm coming in here, and these were what? These were my program constants. Set those earlier. I set the minimum height to 12. I set the maximum height to 96. I set the minimum weight to 1, the maximum weight to 777, and this BMI constant that we use in the equation, all right, that particular constant, I set that to 703 because that's the one that we use. Now, I should really write comments over here, minimum allowable weight maximum allowable weight. I guess I could really just steal both these. Minimum allowable height. Oops. And maximum allowable height. And I guess those are weight. And that's weight, and that's height. And this is just, for lack of better words, used in BMI calculation. All right. All that makes sense? So this will end up being inputted height converted to int. How about just say height converted to int? So it'll all fit and it's not going to run off the screen. This will be weight converted to int. And this will be the calculated BMI. Does all that make sense? Okay, just added some comments. Now, you may or may not be aware of this. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to do here, right, and I'll come right back to this. So if this leaves for a second, don't worry, it'll come back in just a second. All right. Is I'm going to come over here and on my P drive, I'm going to do something that most of the time programmers unfortunately don't do. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go down to where we've got the homework and where I put the comments, and I'm going to find the comment for Chapter 4. All right, here's BMI 2. This is all the same comments that we had before. Everything that you see right here is the same comment that we had before, but I'm going to add this because this is what we're supposed to add. In the formula, weight is measured in pounds and height in inches. Enhance the program so it displays a message indicating whether the person that has optimal weight is underweight or is overweight. And the way that we do that is we take the BMI that we figured out. If the BMI is less than 18.5, they're underweight. If it's greater than 25, they're overweight. And if it's between 18.5 and 25, they're of optimal weight. Does the concept make sense to people? So I'm going to grab that code that I just highlighted there in gray, and I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. Then I'm going to go back to my program, and I'm going to add that in here. And as I said, unfortunately, what happens at times at least, is that when people go and they update programs, they don't update their comments. So again, somebody looks at it and says, what did you do that for? What is this? What is this? But I'm putting some stuff at the top of my program to at least try to indicate to somebody what I used here. All right? I'm going to create two more constants in just a second, but I want you to take a look at what's in gray right there, because ideally I want this to make sense to you. I'm going to have a constant that I'm going to call overweight that I'm going to set to 25. And I'm going to have one that's called underweight that's set to 18.5. I'm not going to need one that's called optimal weight. If you're not underweight and you're not overweight, you must be optimal weight. Does that make sense? All right. So I added in these comments rather. And again, as I said, unfortunately at times people just don't do that. All right. And commenting isn't sexy, it's not fun, but it's an important, viable part of any program. All right. And again, I will guarantee to you that if you go out and you are interviewing for a programming job, and somebody asks to see your code and you have no comments in it whatsoever, you will stand out that way. And I've told you stuff like this before. Please don't put a comment like right here on the line I'm in and say blank line. I mean, that's just stupid. So you can over-comment. All right, you could make the case and say, well, yeah, you over-commented, Jeff, because you use names right here that really, yeah, but I'm letting you know. If you had any doubt, the minimum allowable, the maximum allowable, etc. Okay? So I'm down here in my calculate, and I'm going to add two more constants. And I'm going to make them both doubles. And the first one I'm going to call under. I could call it underweight. I'm just going to call it under. And I'm going to set that to 18.5. And I'll put just a comment here for underweight BMI. You notice I get the green right there right away, and by now it should make sense to you why I'm getting the green. The green is a warning, and the system is telling me I have a constant named under that I'm not using in the program. And that's correct. I'm about to use it. All right. In much the same way, const double over. All right, and I'm going to set that equal to 25. Again, I could have set it to 25.0. That would have been fine. For overweight BMI. All right? They're not lined up. I don't care. That's fine. So right now, I'm going to use these, and hopefully, whoops, not a BMT. All right. Hopefully this makes sense to everybody. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say if your BMI was under this, then what we want to have is inside of here, we want that to say underweight. All right? If your BMI is greater than 25, then in here, we want that to say overweight. And if it's neither of those, we want it to say optimal weight. All right. Now, if I wanted to, and what I'm about to show you, I'm going to put it in here, but then I'm going to leave it up to you as to whether or not you actually do this. All right? Sometimes what people like to do is they also like to come in here and say this. All right, they like to set up their strings right there. Oops. All right, the advantage of doing that and setting up these constants, and that still should have been big S's, sorry. All right, maybe it should have been small. Let's see. I guess small looks better. It's blue like the rest of them. The advantage of doing this is when we end up writing the stuff out, it'll be a little cleaner. And if you don't know what I mean, you will in just a second. All right. Now, I don't care if you do this or don't do this. Okay. And would I need a comment here? Well, if I put a comment there, I would have just have said string underweight, string overweight, and string optimal weight. All right. You can put them there. You can leave them off. Okay, and notice I called it under W instead of under because I already used that name up here. You can't use the same name twice. So if I come here, if you look on the screen here, if I were to change that from under W to under and get off, all right, now it's red instead of green because now it says I already have a constant by that name. And the system is confused. All right. So now when I go back and do that again, it's now green. So typically green means warning in your programs here, where red means error. So with green, it'll usually still compile, but really you should strive to not have any warnings or any errors in your program. All right. So I've got all that stuff, and again, this is my new stuff here in gray. And the only thing I'm going to have to be concerned with, once I've figured out that BMI, is I'm going to use these 5 different constants to figure out what the person's BMI status is. Okay? Now, since I've got height, and I've got weight, and I've got BMI, I'm going to add another one in here. I'm going to add a string. This is a variable now, and I'm going to call it status, and I'm going to set it equal to nothing. And it'll be my BMI status. In other words, underweight, overweight, or optimal weight. All right, so we're going to do that in just a second. Again, it's green because, again, I haven't used it yet. And I'm going to use it in just a minute. We did all of this other stuff in class earlier. We did this in an earlier class, so I'm not going to go through that stuff with you right now with the try, catch, etc., because we've done that. If you notice in my errors, I get 6 different warnings. That's all the things that are in green right now telling me that it's been assigned a value, but it's never used in the program. So I'm going to use them right now. Now, I didn't do this before, but again, I should have really come in here and said validate. How about this? Input and validate height. All right. Convert height to integer. Perform range check on height. So what am I doing here? Well, input and validate height, that's what I'm doing with my try-catch block. Here I am literally attempting to convert what's in that text box that I put in. I'm attempting to convert it into an integer and throw it into my variable height, which was defined as an integer. All right, and what is this going to do? Well, this one right here, this is going to, whoops, sorry. This is going to catch non-numeric input or non-numeric height. All right, and it's not mandatory that you put in all those comments, but it does make it easier for somebody looking through your program to figure out what's going on. Not only somebody else, but it might be you coming back to it in a few weeks or a few months or whatever. All right, and sometimes, especially when sometimes I'll have what I consider to be an epiphany, and wow, I could do it this way, and I'll do it that way. And if I don't put a comment, I'll come back months later and wonder, why the heck did I do that? All right, but by just putting in a couple lines worth of comments, and sometimes I'll even put a date in there, so I can remind myself when I did this. All right. We don't go into it here, but we go into it a little bit in the iOS programming class, because there's something that you can use that's called SCM, or source code management, which you may or may not have heard of before. But with source code management, you use tools, and when you use these source code management tools, what it does is I can bring up my program like I did today. Okay? Then I can go and make all the changes I want, and what I'll notice is off to the side or something here, every single line that I've changed or added or removed or whatever will be in red. Because what the system is letting me know is all the stuff that's changed since the last iteration of the program. And that can be really nice, especially if you're working on a project with other people. All right? Okay, so I've done all that stuff. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all those comments that I just made, and I'm going to copy them again. Instead of saying input and validate height, I'm going to say input and validate weight, and convert weight to integer, And, whoops, not there, sorry. And then finally, perform range check on weight. And in my catch non-numeric weight. All right. Now, if I get down to this point, if I'm down here where I'm doing the calculation, I have to have, and again, what I'm about to tell you, this is stuff that should be making sense to you now. All right. Right here, when I put in the height, okay, all the stuff in here, I'm checking for two things. First, I'm checking to make sure it's numeric. If it's not numeric, then this is going to fail. And if that fails, I'm going to go down into this catch block and do my other stuff. All right? But if this succeeds, I know I put a number in here. So now I'm doing this. And if this fails, if I put in a number less than 12 or a number greater than 96, it also fails. But if I get down to this line right here, this blank line 112, this should make sense to all of you in here. That means I put in a valid height. It's numeric, and it's within range. So now I'm doing the same thing with the weight. And if I get down where where I put in, and it succeeds that it's numeric, then I check to make sure it's between whatever we said, 1 pound and 777 pounds. If this fails, then I'm going to go down and do that catch statement. If this fails, then I'm going to go do this. But if I get down to right here, to this line of code, where I do the BMI, now I know I put in a valid height and I put in a valid weight. All right? So, valid weight or height and weight inputted. Calculate BMI. And print in text box. Because that's what I'm doing in these two lines right here. All right. There comes a point when you are writing comments for code, for lack of better words, it doesn't pay anymore. Because if the person looking at your code can't understand what you're doing via your comments, maybe they don't deserve to be working on your code. Now that might sound like a very unfair comment. All right. And I will tell you, maybe I've told you this before, that when I started at AT&T, one of the first assignments I had was to go through and maintain some existing code. And guess what? There were about 5,000 lines. I'd say that would be no lines of comments. And it was very hard. I was constantly doing things. I made copies of stuff because I didn't want to make changes to anything because I could have screwed it up, to make sure I understood it ahead of time. But if somebody had done something like this, it would have made it much easier for me to understand what was going on. All right, so now I want to come down here. Now I'm going to write my comment. I'm going to calculate the BMI status. So that's what I'm going to do next. Now, if I do this, if I say this, if what am I checking right there? I'm asking you in English. What is that doing? Right, so that's if it's less than 18.5. Well, I already did this. All right, so I know I want to do something similar down here, but what I want to do is I want to say text box status dot text equals, now I can just say under W. Oops. Again, if I didn't write that other constant up here, if you look up on the screen here, if I didn't create this constant right there, if I didn't do that one, Then down here, instead of saying it equals under W, all right, I could have literally just put in there underweight. That's why, like I said, it really doesn't matter which way you do it. All right, it's whatever way makes more sense to you, that's what you should be doing. Does it make sense when you look at the code right there? Does it make sense what we're doing right here? We have calculated the BMI previously. So now we're coming in and we're saying, if it happens to be under 18.5, we want the text box for the status to say underweight. If it's greater than 25, we want the text box for the status to say overweight. And if it's neither one of those, so if that's not true and that's not true, it must be in the optimal weight range. So we want to do that. All right, I'll come right back and I'll put the code back up here in just a second. Let's run it first to make sure I didn't screw it up. All right, so I'll put in 72 and 111. Okay, again, you see I have to make that a little bigger, but you can see it's underweight, and that's good because it's under that. All right, so that looks good. Clear works. Everything was cleared. All right, yep, that's overweight. Clear again. And that's optimal weight. So it all appears, at least appears, to be working. All right. Now I will tell you that when you do that and you're checking all this stuff, you want to make sure, for instance, it'd be great to find a weight that literally would come up with a BMI of 18.5. Because remember, it's only if it's under 18.5. So if I could find one that was 18.5 and then maybe make it a pound less, just you want to check. So what I'm telling you is, for example, let's say I'm writing a program to calculate grades. Okay? 70 to 79 is a C, 80 to 89 is a B, 90 to 100 is an A. Everybody with me? That makes sense, right? So I should check, for instance, if I want to check 70 to 79, I should check 69 to make sure that it's not a C, but I should check 70 and 71 and maybe something else. You should always be checking the values that you're looking for and something before it and something after it to make sure that it appears at least to be working correctly. All right? I mean, when you think about it, if I'm literally allowing what? My height can be anything from 12 to 96. That's like 85 different possibilities. And my weight is 1 to 777. So that's 777 possibilities. All right? So 85 times 177 is a big honking number. There's no way I'm going to have the time or the wherewithal to test every single one of those. But I should test at least a few of them to make sure that at least they appear to be working. All right? So I'm going to come back here, and the only thing I want to do here, because basically the program's finished, and I like to keep my stuff at least a little bit symmetrical looking. All right, so I'm going to come back up here, and where I locked it, I'm going to unlock it, stretch it out just a little bit, all right, and then lock it again. Why? So now when I run this, everything should fit in here. Underweight fits, and I still got a little room. All right. Optimal weight fits, and overweight fits. Okay. Now, what I want to show you real quickly, because I'm done with this, but what I want to show you real quickly is just exactly how anal about this stuff you get is up to you. All right. And this is what I want to show you. I'm going to highlight everything here, all this stuff. All right, so I'm highlighting the two text boxes, actually the 4 text boxes, the 2 that are not read-only and the 2 that are read-only. If I want to, I can come up and there's something in here, text align. Right now it's left justified by default. I can make it center. Okay, so if I run the program again, notice how it differs from the way it looked previously. There's my cursor right in the middle. So again, if I come in here, 77, 177. Now, if that's nicer for you, if you like that better, I don't really care that much. To me, that's aesthetic stuff that you can always go back and add, but it's not really that important. Yes. Oh, okay, okay. Everybody hear that? I'm glad you asked because I screwed up. It works fine, but Micah's question was, okay, we did this, but we came in here and we had this thing that said status, right? Up here. And but that's it's almost as if I had you in there as an audience plant, all right? Because I screwed up. So that is still not being used. So we come back down here, and now where we did all these, okay, now we say status equals, and there, and there, and I got to remove the dot text. All right, so why would we want to do that? Because now I can come down here and say text box status dot text equals status. All right, and the advantage of doing that is how many times did I actually change that variable? Once. So thank you for bringing that up. Now, whether you did it like that or didn't is totally up to you. All right, but one of the things that you're going to be hopefully learning here over the next couple years, because it's one of the ideas that's really strong today in most programming languages, and that's the idea of an architecture that's called Model View Controller, or MVC architecture. And you can do MVC in anything. You actually learned a little bit, those of you who were in the 157 class with me last semester, I started to teach that to you. And what do I mean by that? Your JavaScript file, your JavaScript was always in .js files. Your HTML was always in .html files. Your CSS was always in CSS files, .css. That CSS, you use that for presentation. That's all it's used for. It's for presentation. All right? That's the view. The JavaScript was kind of your logic that made everything talk to one another. That's your controller. And what's left, your model, in this case, is your HTML. But you'll learn about that in different programming languages. And the reason I'm telling you that is what we're doing is we're basically taking the code here. This is actually this code, that line right there that you see, and it should still work the same. I'll run it in a second. That line is what ends up getting printed in here. Only setting it once is better than setting it 3 times, because now I've got one chance where I can screw it up. Before I had 3 chances where I could screw it up. All right. So I'm going to save, run it one more time, and make sure I didn't miss anything. And notice I'm not putting in garbage values anymore. We did that last time. We checked that stuff, so I'm not checking that right now. All right. So I'm going to come in here again in 77, 111. Okay, looks like it still works. That's underweight. Yes, that's below. Let's see if we can find something. All right, that's optimal. So that's optimal. All right, that's 18.38, and that's underweight, and that's under 18.5. So that's good. It looks like we're pretty close there. There's 18.62, and notice it jumped from underweight to optimal weight. And if we put in 156, that's right on the cusp. Remember, it was anything below 18.50. So did we make a mistake? It's possible. All right, so you should always be going in there and checking all those values. All right, because that says 18.5 is underweight, which may or may not be correct. Let's look at our code. That says if it's less than under, and what was under set to? 18.5. So that says if it's less than under, status should have been underweight. Now, I'm not sure exactly why, when it was right at 18.5, it said underweight. I don't know. All right, so I'd have to go back and try to look at that. Now, that's because it acted as though I said less than or equal to, which isn't what I wanted. All right, so I'd have to go back and check that. That's just another thing. As I'm going through there and writing the program, I mean, that's just something else I'd have to take a look at. All right, I'll tell you what it probably is, just so you know, is literally the way that computers work is when I came through there and set this constant to 18.5, all right, that what happens literally is the computer goes in and it sets something internally, but it could be 18.50000000167 or something like that. All right. So I could have actually came in here and said under, and I could have, for example, I could have put 18.49. I could have done that. All right. And maybe that is what I end up doing, and then I come down here and I change that to less than or equal to. This is all stuff as a programmer. I mean, it's not technically that important for what we're doing. All right, but as a programmer, now 18.5 says it's optimal, which is what it should have been. All right, and let's try 155, and that's underweight. Now, the weight I only allow to be put in integers and the height. If I decided I was going to make that double, I might have to look at this even more. All right, but what I wanted to get across to you in this program that we just did was, let's take 3 minutes, and then we're taking a break. What's new in here? We put in these constants. Whoop, not that first one. So we put in those constants, underweight and overweight. All right, and then the actual words underweight, overweight, and optimal weight. And again, we didn't have to use those. All right, so we put those in. Then we added a new variable that was called status, that was going to hold either underweight or overweight or optimal weight. All right, then we put some comments in here to let the reader know exactly what we were attempting to do in here. And all the new code that we added was literally, move this down a bit. That was everything right there. It's not like we added a lot of new code. In fact, those were comments that we put in. This was not new code. So the only new code that we added right here was that stuff. And the reason that I chose this program was what we were able to do in the first iteration of it, the one we did in the last chapter, is we were able to go in and actually do some input validation and concentrate on that there. Now we can concentrate on using the if statement. All right. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing, and then we're going to take a break. In the on the P drive for this class, I think I've got it in there, so let me check first. So in your in-class folder, under today's date, yeah, good. So if you go out to here, move that a little smaller. All right, so if you go out there, there's a folder there with today's date on it, and if you grab that folder, it's called employee-copy. If you grab that and just drag it out to your virtual desktop, then take a break, and we'll start back up at 9 o'clock. All right, so I want that one, and I'll talk about both of these after the break.